Okay, so when we look at the three domain poster over here on the side of the room, but also a different depiction of up here on the front of the screen, what we're looking at is the broadest classification, right? All living things divided into three categories is what a domain is. When we break that down further, we sometimes can classify things with a little bit more detail. But our three domains include bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. We talked briefly at the beginning of the year about these tree diagrams and kind of what they mean. And when you look at something with these branches on them, what you're looking at is these points where they intersect. Those individual points are considered common ancestors, meaning it would be where that life form possibly diverged from another common ancestor, another common life form. The bacteria themselves are probably the most abundant on Earth, but it doesn't mean that it's something that we see as frequently as other species or other organisms. Archaea we don't see quite as much. They're usually what we call our extremophiles or extreme condition surviving species. The eukarya is probably the one that you're most familiar with. Those are the ones that you've actually possibly seen. As in, that's a joke. Like, you look around, you see each other, right? We're in that category. And then it's probably the most diverse group, meaning it has a lot of characteristics within that domain that can differentiate further down into smaller categories. This chart is a really handy chart because I think what it does for us is it kind of breaks down those specific characteristics. You don't need to write anything down from this because I'm actually going to go through some of these details. But when you look at this, you have your domains coming across the top, right? The bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. And then the next line down is kingdoms. It's how we get more specific. So as we were talking about, those different organizational groupings, domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, those individual groups become more specific, meaning we have more groups every level down we go. You guys won't be responsible for knowing the lowest levels, all the groups of those lowest levels, but as far as domain and kingdom is concerned, you should easily be able to identify the levels that are present in each one of those stages. So domain, we have the archaea, bacteria, and eukarya. Kingdoms, we have what's called eubacteria, which is just, again, our bacteria group. We have archaebacteria in the archaea group. But then our eukarya is broke up into 4 kingdoms as opposed to just one. And you guys have on your sheets of paper that I gave you, you have those 4 kingdoms. Those kingdoms are the protists, fungi, plants, and animals. Often you will see that pronounced or written a little differently. So you could see protista, you would see fungi, plantae, and animalia. If you see the word plants, animals, it's just meaning the same thing. Okay, plantae and animalia are the more scientific term for it, but I will frequently just say animals or plants. As we go down this table, you're going to see these cell structures. And so we're going to touch on some of the specifics, but we're not just I'm not going to require you to know all those details. Okay. Number of cells, meaning how many cells are the organisms themselves composed of. Our bacteria and our archaebacteria, those are our unicellular organisms, meaning what? What does unicellular mean? Trevor? Unicellular. Calling someone to help you?
There's one cell.
They're just one-celled organisms. So bacteria is just a one-celled organism. Okay. Then we get into some of these other groups, and the majority of eukarya is multicellular, but there is some unicellular organisms within that domain. So protists, for example, those are the ones that are mostly unicellular, and we call it our junk group. So it's just kind of the leftover stuff that doesn't fit with the fungi, plantae, and animalia, to be honest. It's just kind of everything else that really scientists don't have a good classification for. When I was in school, we had what was called the 6 kingdoms, and we did not talk about domains. Scientists since then have differentiated the groups, and that's when they decided, okay, we can make these a little bit more specific. We have 3 domains, then underneath one of those domains, we have 4 kingdoms. So what I'm getting at with that is that sometimes the way we classify things will change. When you guys are grown adults and in your 30s, it's possible that these classification groups will change. And that changes as we learn more about the different species. Okay? The mode of nutrition is going to change. And you guys know these terms as well, but this is probably the first time that we're really going to focus on what is an autotroph and what is a heterotroph. So autotroph, auto, self-feeding, autotroph. Heterotroph, meaning it gets its energy from somewhere else. It has to go out and get its energy. It doesn't just make its own food. Okay? When we talk about bacteria, they can be autotrophs, they can be heterotrophs. The archaea is the same way. Protists, same way. Again, they're our junk group, right? So they kind of have some versatile characteristics in comparison to everything else. Our fungi are going to be heterotrophs, meaning they have to go get their food from something else. And then our plants, we know this, are autotrophs. They feed themselves. They photosynthesize. Okay? And then animalia, those guys are going to be heterotrophs as well. We need to go get our food from somewhere else. We do not make our own food within our own bodies. So sometimes students go, well, yeah, we do. We go home to our kitchens and we make our own food. But that food came from something else. It came from another organism. Okay, so to be very clear, yes, we, quote unquote, make our own food, but we don't do that without the assistance of something else. Okay, and then down here they have some examples that are specific. As far as what you guys need to know, when we're talking about bacteria, so like on your notes page, there's a term called a prokaryote. Did anyone find what a prokaryote was or what prokaryote is referring to?
It was that have like microorganisms that have them in their like something about microorganisms. That's all I remember.
Okay.
There's like a
Okay, yeah, they are unicellular. So bacteria, like I said, can be unicellular or it can be, in some rare cases, multicellular. But primarily we're going to say that bacteria is unicellular. And this prokaryote word itself has something to do with the cells they're made of. Because bacteria is made of what's called a prokaryote, meaning a cell without a nucleus. So prokaryotes are cells without a nucleus. Okay. And in case you're not sure what a nucleus is, a nucleus itself is this little area that contains nucleic acids within a cell. But obviously, the bacteria doesn't have it. So that means that their nucleic acids are kind of freely floating throughout the cell. We're going to study cells later in the year. You're going to see some more specific information on cells. But a nucleus is an area that contains nucleic acids. Other distinguishing factor for these guys, they can be heterotrophs or autotrophs. Again, heterotrophs, meaning they have to go get their food from something else, or autotrophs, meaning they get their food or make their own food. Excuse me. Archaea, on the other hand, again, they are unicellular prokaryotes. Okay, so we talked about what a prokaryote was. Archaea is, again, a unicellular prokaryote. These guys are very similar to bacteria, but have a different chemical makeup, meaning the primary atoms and the smallest unit of structure that they're made of is different. Okay, so they have a different chemical makeup than that of bacteria. And these are the guys, like I said, that live in very extreme conditions. So near volcanoes, Or a great example that Ethan said, in Yellowstone, near geysers, very hot, extreme conditions. Okay, and these guys can be heterotrophs or autotrophs as well. So you want to make sure that you have that down as well. Oops, autotrophs. And today we're going to jump into that third domain, which is eukarya. Okay? And when we talk about eukarya, we're talking about the domain which has eukaryotic cells or eukaryotes. And that specifically means that their cells have a nucleus. So you certainly want this in your notes. But eukaryotes are cells which contain a nucleus. One of the things I asked you to do with your cards was sort them into levels. So we know the 3 domains are at the top, right? We know that we have bacteria. So that's one of my cards, archaea. And then my last card would be eukarya. But you guys have 4 other kingdoms listed. So if we were to organize them into a concept map, we could easily say, okay, these are the classification levels, or whatever your heading is that I gave you. It's the one that's in a box.
Major life classification groups.
And then each of these 3 would fit underneath that. And then under eukarya, we get more specific. How many kingdoms do we have under eukarya, Nick? 4. So we see 4 kingdoms underneath eukarya itself. So all 4 of those would actually be located underneath eukarya. And by all 4 of those, I mean the protists. Again, this is the group of organisms. It's kind of our leftover group. They have a lot of versatility in their characteristics, but it's basically anything that did not fit with the fungi, the plants, and my last one, the animals. Sorry, I ran out of space there. But fungi, plants, and animals are pretty specific, meaning they become a lot more detailed in what it requires to be classified underneath those kingdoms. Much more so than that of protists. Okay, so again, here's that breakout. You have under eukarya, you have the protists, the fungi, plants, and animals. Here's some of the specific stuff you should know about each of these 4. Again, protists, I'm going to call them my odds and ends group. If you need to add to your notes to understand that later on, when you read that, if the odds and end group doesn't make sense to you, maybe add something along the lines of everything that didn't fit in the other 3 kingdoms. Everything that's left over. Okay, that's an appropriate way of phrasing it. We have, it's not like the rest, so that's why it kind of ends up in here. Most are unicellular. Which means, can we have multicellular protists?
Yep.
Yes. So some multicellular. Fungi are usually multicellular. There are very few unicellular. How many of you have ever heard of yeast that you use to bake bread? That's technically a fungi. It's a single-celled organism, and it's fungi. And then they are heterotrophs. Most of which are decomposers. What do we mean by decomposers? Aaliyah?
Basically, they find what they usually eat, and basically they break it down so they actually can absorb it easier.
Yeah.
Like some grow on trees, but instead of actually eating the wood itself, they actually raw on it and make it like softer, so that their mycelium can actually go in there and extract all the nutrients they can.
Yep. So decomposers actually tend to break down dead things. So if you've ever seen, something killed on the side of the road, that the flies come in, right? Maggots will be all over the flies because maggots are what? Or be all over the carcass. It's the eggs of the baby that have hatched into the larva stage, and they are decomposers. They'll break down that decaying matter. So I think it's close to 99% of decomposers feed off of something that's dead as opposed to something that's alive. Happens a lot in trees after trees die. So trees start getting rotted out from the inside out. How many of you have ever seen a hollowed out tree or a tree trunk? It's probably been eaten or destroyed by a decomposer after the tree died. I think that's going to be the majority of the main points for the group fungi. But I'm also going to put on here, most are found on land. That's also significant to know. Our plant group. Talked about them a little bit. But our plant group, we said, are multicellular. They're autotrophs, meaning they make their own food. And one thing that students often get confused of, they include things like plants and mosses. Quite often students want to group mosses with fungi, but mosses are actually an example of a plant. So if you ever have that difficulty in which group the mosses belong to, maybe make a note to yourself that mosses are considered a plant. And then our group for the animals, or Animalia, specific, multicellular again. They're heterotrophs, meaning they get their food from some other organism. And I'm going to put diverse. Mostly because they can live in such different environments. Okay? We can have animals that live in the Arctic. We can have animals that live in the desert. But they're still grouped together into this one kingdom. And it's mostly off that broad classification that they are multicellular and they are heterotrophs.